Good afternoon. Most of the international guests that you have seen yesterday and that you will see and are seeing today have been a part of a working group meeting in the morning when we were looking at the European Artistic Freedom Act, discussing it from very, very different perspectives. And what is interesting, I think, is that, perhaps not as interesting as natural, is that I think everyone in this hall is familiar and understands the serious threat that artistic freedom in Europe faces currently. We are talking about censorship, we're talking about political appointments, funding pressure, and most insidiously, self-censorship. And the first question with which I would like to start is, what are some examples of how these pressures can operate in practice? It doesn't necessarily have to be through an explicit ban or political control, as in the case of what László was talking about, but through a chain of decisions that gradually narrows down and what artists and institutions feel that they can actually do in their practice. Anyone would like to start?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think what Sanjay was saying is so important. These interferences are very subtle often. So we're often talking about people being led to self-censorship. And that can be through political pressure, financial cuts that make your whole planning and decision-making dependent on the political will of the moment. If you're running a cultural institution, you're not just responsible to yourself and your audience, you're responsible often to many hundreds of employees who are working for you and are dependent on your decisions and your relationships with politicians. So you make compromises which you do not want to make in order to guarantee the continuation of your organization. And I find that subtle and very nefarious influence particularly worrying, because as we all know, if there's that kind of threat financially on budgets and on the institution's very survival, what flies out, first of all, is going to be the controversial, questioning, politically difficult conversation. And in my case, as I run the organization Opera Europa, many of these politicians would like us to just play Traviata on a Saturday night and avoid, if possible, anything remotely contentious. And that is very insidious. It's an insidious way of controlling. It's hard to put it down on paper. They're not saying you cannot do this, or you cannot commission a new opera on the subject of the Shell trial, for example, in Amsterdam. What they're saying is, but look at your numbers, you haven't got the audience, you haven't got the finance now, so we're going to reduce your budget next year. And that I find very insidious and very dangerous and spreading a lot throughout Europe now.
Yes, I agree with Karen. My name is Amy PRADELL, and I represent European Theatre Convention. We basically advocate for European state theatres. We currently have over 80 members spread across over 30 countries. So that means we hear from theatres large and small, really across Europe. And so the forms of political pressure can be expressed in many ways, in terms of outright pressure, actual censorship, or people being fired, not reappointed, and also this very subtle self-censorship that we see. We definitely see day-to-day decision-making affected, particularly not in terms of just appointments, but also in terms of programming, in terms of curatorial decisions. And often this has the result that theaters will become much more risk-averse, and that basically a politics of taste will start to be in effect. And this is especially insidious in that it effectively silences these minority voices, these radical voices, or let's say politically bolder voices, so that's what we see. We see definitely a day-to-day effect on programming. On a structural level, we absolutely see financial pressure in the form of budget cuts. We've all seen this, and this kind of thing can take effect overnight. So that has also been the case that many organizations, especially here, as everyone has experienced, can basically be taken by surprise overnight and have everything cut without explanation and without any plan B.
Yeah,
Laszlo?
I mean, I won't introduce myself again. Thank you. I'm just wondering that the negative censorship is also, it can be very dangerous, and I explain what I mean by negative, the opposite of censorship. I remember 1978 was the season of new Soviet drama, and Hungarian theaters all around the country were encouraged to present a new Soviet play, and there was a special fund you could apply for. So underfunded theaters thought it would be wise to put on one new Soviet play to get those extra funds. And that's the total opposite of censorship. No one said them what not to do. They just encouraged them to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. And the very same thing happens in 2006 when the illiberal Fidesz party was not in government, but they won a landslide victory in municipal elections, and they changed the heads of the artistic directors of all the regional theaters, which is, very, very important. And they advertised the new tendency of theater of the hope. And what they meant by this, and they made it very clear that it's time to end, the analysis of the human nature and explore the dark side of our living, etc., etc. Instead, you have to project a beautiful future, the beauty of life, the beauty of family, etc., etc. So censorship, yes, that's very clear, that's very visible, we can all fight against that. Self-censorship is even more dangerous because you internalize it, as we said. But this other kind of prioritization of some values that are not your inner values, but you'd better follow those values is equally dangerous. If you have 3 slots in a season, or you can publish so many books a year. If you're a publisher, if you're encouraged to do something you wouldn't otherwise do, but are well paid for, then you will change your instincts.
During the discussion in the morning in the working group, one of the interesting points that was made, I think, was that we already had some protections for freedom of expression, for cultural rights, for autonomy of institutions. On top of that, something that wasn't said, but I think that it has to be brought up, not too long ago, it seems, we also used to have norms, used to have democratic habits, informal safeguards, right? When we look at the bigger picture, when we kind of step outside of culture for a moment, if that's even possible, it's obvious that we are living through a period of great disruption, political, societal, technological. And in this era of rupture of all that we have been used to, are there any examples where the existing protections and norms proven sufficient for protecting artistic freedom? I mean, László was talking about the great fight that they made in Budapest, but that was a long and definitely exhausting fight. So maybe some smaller examples where we are not completely losing, as it seems that we might be.
I'm certainly happy to take the word on that. I think that, yes, we all know that there are laws protecting freedom of expression in Europe and in many other countries as well, through instruments like the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights and the Council of Europe framework. But in practice, we're seeing artists in different countries experiencing many different levels of protection. Political pressure, of course, on theatres, and defunding artists because of controversial work. I mean, we saw fairly recently, I think a year ago in Sofia in Bulgaria, a play by H.G. Wells being basically stopped because it contravened. It wasn't actually stopped officially. There was an illegal demonstration that blocked the theatre. The police that were standing around refused to do anything because they knew that the Minister of Culture didn't agree with the play that was directed by the famous American actor-director John Malkovich. So it was not exactly, and it's H.G. Wells, which is not exactly, cutting-edge modern today, but it's made suggestions about the history of Bulgaria which the government did not agree with. So the police just stood by and laughed while the premiere was stopped and only 10 people could go inside. So that's, again, no, it's not a direct intervention by the government. It's a passive-aggressive intervention on behalf of the government. Also, there are all kinds of laws, some of which seem to protect us, discussions on religion or sexuality. These laws that are supposed to protect people are then often used exactly in an artistic field to limit the freedom of expression of artists on stage on whatever level you're talking about. I think we heard this morning about problems in Poland with Catholic, but you could say the same problem existed with Charlie Hebdo in France, that in the end freedom of expression is limited by the danger that you're offending someone. And I said this morning, and I will repeat it here, ladies and gentlemen, there is no law that says you are not allowed to be offended by something, I'm afraid. And actually, that is the job of art and culture. It is to provoke and sometimes to offend in order to discuss the issue. We don't have to be all in agreement. And so, we've seen local authorities making it difficult for art exhibitions to happen because they don't like the content. And it's always done in a very subtle way. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't afford it at the moment. Or we don't have the personnel to open it. Or we don't have I think it's going to be dangerous. We don't have the security to make sure that you're all safe. They don't mean that. They mean, we want you to feel unsafe. And so we get that a lot. And as I come back to the idea, is that you say that. I know myself, because I was, before I took over Opera Europa, I was running I was a Generalintendantin in Magdeburg in Germany for 12 years. And I did in 2015, I did a Ukraine festival because of the of Putin's march into Crimea. I tried to get politicians to come and join a debate. They refused because at the time there were the big negotiations between Angela Merkel, Gazprom and Putin. And so they were not interested. So it's not that they said, no, you can't do this, but they made it impossible to have any form of dialogue by not accepting any conversation which involved them. And being put to the question of, do we think it's right to invade Crimea? And is that the first step in an approach to the wider Europe? And of course, oh, surprise, surprise, a few years later, of course it carried on into Ukraine. And so most of these things, yes, we can find the example, the politicians not joining part here. It's very rare that we can find a direct example of a politician saying, no, thou shalt not do it. That does not happen very often. Right. It's much more subtle.
And that is a piece of very bad news in answer to your question. No structure will defend us if we don't defend ourselves. No question. So, as you said, theater and art in general should be subversive. It doesn't mean that we have to punch everyone coming to the audience, but you know, we have the right to be offended, but we also have the right to practice civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Because especially politicians, but not only politicians, always find a way to circumvent the existing law. So they will find a way to not ban you, but make your life impossible. And by you, I mean the audiences and the creators as well. So it's all about your personal courage. And a few minutes ago, I said one of the rules is not to accept the role of a victim. And another rule is do not accept that, you know, that you have no right to speak the truth, you have no right to do the right thing, even though other people, you know, dissuade you.
Mm. I mean, I think, you know, look at the manipulation in Italy. They brought in a law to say that if you were going to be over 70, you could not have your contract as a theatre manager extended. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable law, and we can all understand it, and it's quite reasonable. But in fact, as we all know, it was used to get rid of 3 general managers in Italy of big theatres who were foreigners. And in fact, when finally Dominique Meyer, a man of enormous experience was put aside at La Scala in Milan, the culture minister of Italy said, thank God after 3 foreigners we finally got back an Italian running La Scala. And why do we think that's dangerous? I mean, I like the general manager. Fortunato Ortombina is a marvelous person, but I think there's a general assumption that being an Italian national, he is more likely to toe the line and follow the desire of the politicians in his country than maybe a foreigner would. So who might be slightly more questioning. And we all know, we were talking this morning as well about the situation that a music director of the famous La Fenice Theatre in Venice, I mean famous not only because it was the site of the world premiere of Verdi's Traviata, engaged a music director who was Beatrice Venezzi, who was completely unqualified to do the job, but she was a political appointment. Luckily, the orchestra was so furious about it and demonstrated so loudly that, in fact, that in the end didn't happen. But, you know, she was put aside. But all of these ways are very, I use the word again, insidious, because it's the way that it's being done. It appears to be all legal, but we know that what they're trying to do in Italy's case is get rid of the foreigners, get rid of anybody who's questioning them, and then in the next selection of personnel is to make sure that they get someone who toes the line a bit more. So,
but those things are often a case of changing norms, of erosion in norms, right? And also some of the, for example, financial pressures that institutions and also individuals to arts councils can face can have very legitimate reasons, right? Like there are budgetary shifts. For example, many countries in Europe need to rearm, so there are certain shifts in financial priorities when it comes to budgeting. Or the question of incompetency, which we are very familiar here in Slovakia. We really experience the level of incompetency which is still shocking, even after more than 2 years. Many of the people that we are facing in the Ministry of Culture are even incompetent at being the bad guys, which is really actually heartbreaking in a way. But where can the European Artistic Freedom Act actually help? It's not the norms, I believe, or perhaps I'm wrong, and correct me in that case. But it's more about the legal protection. I mean, is this actually going to be enough? Can it be enough?
Well, sorry, just repeat what I said earlier. No one will save you if you're not ready to save yourself. All these legal actions and the law is for you to to use. It helps you. It is a frame that takes some of the burden of you, but you cannot just refer to the law because again, oh, that's the tram. Okay, I thought it was me. So the people in power will always find a way, but this thing can help us immensely, and will unite people, unite institutions. And we can, use examples of the others. And there's an end of systems with no consequences, systems of action with no consequences, because this is what illiberalism, totalitarianism, and populism is about. They can do whatever without consequences. And if there's a European law, then hopefully that's the end of that era. But it will not solve our problems. It will not save us if we are not ready to save ourselves, I repeat.
To answer your question, will it be enough? Only time will tell. But it's clear that we need more. We need more than what we have now. The main problem is that we now have an enforcement gap. So the question is not, do we need the EAFA, but what will happen if we don't have it? Without it, we really can't guarantee artistic freedom. We can't guarantee fair working conditions. We can't guarantee the independence of cultural institutions. We simply can't guarantee it. So to answer also your previous question about safeguards, the safeguards we have in place now are just not sufficient. Times have changed, and we can't take anything for granted anymore. So that means that arts organizations, the broader cultural sector, really needs to boost its defenses because, as you said, no one's coming to save us. So we need to get together and really fight for this because if we don't, then who will? That said, I do see a note of optimism and that there's increased sensitivity. For example, as Sanjay said, when he started his work, the question was, who cares? Everyone here, we all care. So the question is, how can we get people to care? How can we get policymakers to care? I think it's caring and also the increased sensitivity for these issues. I think we've seen great strides due to the horrible events that we've seen. So we've seen the necessity. And the question now is how can we maintain and build this momentum to actually get legislation done for these basic protections that are sorely needed.
I'm sorry if I'm sounding a bit too critical. It's just that I like to think about things from the other perspective. And this is where I think the fact that we are in Slovakia, which is a post-communist country, is a good example. Because especially in post-communist countries that are members of the European Union, there is this strong polarity in how we see Brussels. So, and often it's more intuitive. It's not completely ideological, but it goes roughly something like this in extreme cases, right? So from one side, Brussels is the imperial capital, right? It's seen as the imperial capital that constantly overreaches and dictates what the member states should do and how we should think, right? And from the other side of the barricade, the European Union is actually the savior. Like that is the thing that is going to save us all. That is the answer to our problems that we haven't managed to solve through national politics and especially elections. And I think this creates a very interesting tension because now we are in a position where culture is under attack, and the European, the eastern countries of the European Union are sort of on the vanguard of this, and it's moving to the west slowly but surely. But this really creates a tension, I believe. I mean, how can we sell this thing? How can we...
But sorry, I need to correct you a little. You said that seen from one side, Brussels, European Union is intervening. I don't think any sane or even insane politician thinks that. This is what they say. This is their propaganda. But I don't think this is the way they see it. Sorry.
No, I mean, that is completely legitimate, but I'm thinking more about voters than politicians. I'm thinking more about the popular perception of the European Union.
May I just say something? I think in my various conversations, obviously, Opera Europe, we have 250 members all around Europe and some beyond. And one of the things that I'm always trying to say is it's not that Brussels makes a decision. Brussels is made up of people from all these different countries. And one of the things that I would urge everybody to do is find out who your European Member of Parliament is. I'm always amazed at how many theatre directors and museum directors do not have a direct relationship with the European Member of Parliament. And the Commission on Culture and Creativity is made up of members of European Parliament from different countries. So if you want to make a difference, or you want to talk, you need to find out who those people are, get them to come to your institution and get them on board and use them as your ambassadors, because I think that is hugely important, rather than seeing the sort of miasma of the European Union, which doesn't have a relationship to the individual. You can always trace it back to someone who's not very far away from this building now. And I think that's got to be done more. And also not to forget that your central government may well be extreme right-wing or extreme left-wing, or anyway, you're not in agreement with them. But the MEPs, like your city councils, are often from different parties, and they're the ones who might be sitting in Brussels. So I think that it's hugely important to get them involved. And also, if I may say so, there's one of our member organizations is La Réunion des Opéras de France, which is a sort of an organization for opera companies in France. Last November, in preparation for what they were expecting was going to be a right-wing landslide in local and regional elections in France, they organized a practice session for general managers with 2 professional psychiatrists and psychologists, where they were going to have interviews and conversations with politicians who hated opera and theatre and art. And in order to inoculate and prepare these general, and say, you can't just ignore them. You need to be getting them into your theatre and getting them on board. So I think on an individual level, it's no use pointing a finger at some distant organization. One's got to get your hands dirty and dive in there.
So from the morning discussion, it seems that the European Artistic Freedom Act is on a good track. I'm very much looking forward to the upcoming panel discussion, when we will hear more about the actual preparations and the contents of the proposal for the EAFA. But we are still several years from hopefully successful adoption of it. And the attacks don't seem to be receding. In fact, it seems that it's getting harsher and harsher every month. Countries are going through elections which in some cases are interpreted internationally as a great success, as in Budapest. In some cases it's seen more as a democratic backslide. For example, Czech Republic and Slovakia, not too long ago. We are looking at several years of working and trying to make European Artistic Freedom Act happen. What are the things that we can do in the meantime? I mean, we all of us are trying to do everything that we can. We are networking, we are creating new advocacy initiatives and so on. But what can we do to defend the actual artistic freedom? László, I was at your speech. I know that was very much the point of it, so I'm not trying to make you to reiterate what you already said. But I think it is an interesting question that we have to ask.
Yeah. If I may go first. Behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. As you said, the time frame is really much longer. We're looking at 3 to 5 years. So what do we do now? Do we sit back and relax? Absolutely not. The EAFA will be executed in the court of law. What we can do in the meantime is build support in the court of public opinion. That's, I think, key for the creative and cultural sectors to do. Build this support. using the beautiful videos that you showed. This kind of thing is really just warms my heart. The awareness campaign that that you executed is really just wonderful. We need more of that, so that citizens understand that, and this will in turn put pressure on policymakers so they understand that there's this groundswell of support. What we've seen at ETC among our member theaters is not just this heightened sensitivity, but this acute awareness of what's happening across the EU. Sanjay also mentioned in his keynote that these things used to be considered a regional problem. Oh, that's just Hungary. That's just Slovakia. It won't happen here. However, now they're seeing, okay, this can happen in our neighboring countries. This can happen in other sectors. It can happen to us. And so there's much more of an identification with these issues, and that means, in turn, that at ETC, for example, our member theaters are really boosting up their advocacy work. ETC, as an organization, advocates on the EU level, and we notice behind the scenes enormous support for the EAFA. For example, the new Culture Compass has protecting artistic freedom as really the first principle. Exactly how they want to do that is a different story. The lawyers can hash that out. However, it is really agreed, that this is the guiding principle for the coming years. And that said, there's a lot of work to be done to maintain this momentum. And I think a lot of that is happening. A great example is today's conference.
I think also, if I may just add something there, is I think that one sometimes ignores the audiences that we have, or the visitors in our museums, are hugely important. And developing friends organizations is important, because these people often have a network inside a city, and mobilizing them as ambassadors for the artistic cultural organization is hugely important, because they care, they love, and they're knowledgeable. And we can support them in putting out that message in newspapers, in letters to their friends, at their hairdressers, for God's sake. I don't mind. But mobilizing that mass movement of people, because after all, it's not just 5 people. In my last theater, which was only a city of 250,000 inhabitants, I sold 187,000 tickets in total in 1 year. And so mobilizing that force is massively important, and will be immensely important in the next 5 years and with these political changes. Even if some of them are going to vote for the other party, it doesn't matter. They can still understand the work you're doing, appreciate it, and support it, even if they're not in complete agreement with it. I think most people who come to the theatre or go to a museum will understand the reason. And so, again, it's starting really on that grassroots level and developing it, and having faith in your audience as a tool that you can use in that debate.
And also, I think, because we have the principles, or we work on the principles. There are principles we agree on. The rest is, technicalities, and the law, language, etc., etc. Why don't we all pretend the EFA is already there? So act as if it was already in action, and try and do everything according, and persuade your partners and your audiences, yes, and everyone around, that these are the rules, these are the principles, we follow those principles. Well, the actual legal terms are not finished yet, but who cares? These are,
I want to get back to something that Karen mentioned, which I think is really crucial when it comes to the EAFA, which is the word grassroots, because I think that it really is extremely interesting that you can have a grassroots attempt at making European legislation. That is truly something amazing in a way. It's also we are also very honored that the International Conference Open Culture last year adopted the Bratislava Declaration, which was very important in the EAFA process. In Slovakia, we are trying to do something similar, but more on a national level. We have also a crowdsourced grassroots plan called the Recovery and Resilience Plan for Culture. which we have started this year and which we will be working on for the next 7 to 8 months, roughly. Do you think that this might be the way that what the artists and culture workers have to do more is try to actively co-create and propose policies and legislation? Because that's what we are doing with the EAFA, basically, just at the European level.
I think it works on every different level, but if you don't have the people of your city, if you don't have your community behind you, you're going to find that people go, oh, I don't know what that's about, or I don't care about it, or it's nothing to do with me. And I think that you've got to bring them on board with you on that journey. And you've got to be working on this on so many different levels. I mean, ETC and Opera Europa both do a lot of direct advocacy in Brussels, and we go and meet people and talk to them all the time, and that's a very important part of that job. But we can't be doing it unless behind us there's a massive movement in favor of, I might not like it, but I think it should be there. You know, that attitude, which I think is so important.
Absolutely. If we talk about cultural networks, the main power lies in our ability to amplify. I don't have the exact number, but among the over 80 ETC theaters, we actually reach millions of people. The combined forces with Opera Europa, we're talking about millions of people. So I think if our audiences are engaged, if we're doing this grassroots work as well, then I think that we can get a groundswell of support for these policy achievements, and that, in turn, will also help humanize the legislation. I think, as you were getting towards Adam, Brussels is a sort of, let's say, behemoth. It's very depersonal, and the task really is to personalize these issues. When we do have these examples, like what happened to you, László, that humanizes the issues and the need. And it's these human stories, I think, that at the end of the day will help pass the legislation.
I think that we can move on to the Slido. You can still send your questions using the QR code or the numerical code which you see on the screen. Could I please ask?
I'm so 19th century. I don't know.
Is there currently a more censored and taboo topic than the genocide of Palestine? Is there currently a more censored and taboo topic than the genocide of Palestine or in Palestine, perhaps? We are being strictly democratic with the questions that we are choosing. I think this speaks for itself.
I mean, I think it's absolutely taboo, and this is one of the big problems that we see. For example, I know that the Israeli opera, for example, is a member of Opera Europa, and they have, over the past 30 years, done enormous work at bringing together Palestinian children to play instruments and participate. I fully support that. It leaves you, though, and it's hugely important that for that next generation that there is some hope and some communication. Would I ban them from a conference? No. Personally, I wouldn't. I find it slightly different with the problem more with our ex-Russian members of our organization, because most of them have all absolutely kowtowed to Putin's line. And so it becomes more problematical. You know. But there is always going to be taboo subjects. I mean, go back to what I mentioned, Charlie Hebdo. You know, there came to be a point where you were not allowed to say a word against anybody who did anything because it was our fault for having insulted the prophet. And I mean, none of this helps anybody. It doesn't help the dialogue, and it doesn't help freedom of expression. Look, Voltaire supposedly said, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I defend to my death that you're right to say it. That's also John Stuart Mill in his 19th century On Liberty. more or less the same sort of thing. But we are allowed to have different opinions. In these days of social media, you would think it's not possible. But we are allowed to have different opinions and still understand that other people have the right to express them. Think I. But you may not agree.
Anybody else? We can move on to another question. If politicians are so skilled in going around existing laws, what makes you think that they will not go around the European Artistic Freedom Act as well?
They will, but we will be more clever than them.
I think it depends on the price. Will there be a fine? And if so, what is the fine? The fine in terms of financial costs and also in terms of acceptance, public acceptance. Laws are meant to be broken, as we can say. The question is, okay, what are the penalties? So I think that remains to be seen, but it sounds like, as we heard this morning in the session, the people who are overseeing the drafting of the law will take these things into account as well. So I think everyone will do their best.
Would artistic freedom in countries such as Slovakia be under less of a threat if the arts weren't so centralized? Just to give you a bit of context, Slovakia is very specific in this, in that most financing of culture actually runs through a centralized system. The Arts Council is a standalone institution that stands outside of Ministry of Culture, but under its control, generally speaking, nowadays definitely. And there aren't that many financial incentives from, for example, regional or municipal levels.
But that can be a problem too, because I mean, look at the situation now in France, where they've tried to make it more regional and more local. Of course, then with the change in the elections that were just recently, that has put tremendous pressure on theatres, because then they are totally dependent on a new wave of politicians coming in. It's a two-edged sword. It can be very good for you and it can be very bad for you. I mean, France was so centralized. It took them 20 years to get other theatres recognized as Théâtre National around France and get central government funding. The system in Germany, in each federal state, there is one theatre which is funded by the central government and by the regional government, and the others are all funded by the city, and it can be very useful because the city wants to develop itself, but it also can be very negative if you get a new wave of politicians coming in and saying, sorry guys, but we've got to repair all the schools, build 2 new motorways. The swimming pool is marauder and is going to, it's not. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, it's sort of.
I think a generalized answer is not possible. I think in practice it depends on who's in charge. Of course, however, the EAFA is actually conceived to supersede the question of who is in charge, so that you don't have this randomness based on the new administration, feeling free to fire everybody. It is supposed to supersede that. That said, I think if centralized or not, it's impossible to say. What's better?
Yeah, I mean, there is centralized and there is centralized. It's not always the same. Like, not only in Slovakia, in Hungary too, until very recently, which means even today, in all fields of life, not only in culture, there are pyramids, like very, very feudal pyramids, and on top of the pyramids are the pharaohs, the kings, loyal to the head of the government, and there's no way around them. So it's built from, and I agree that decentralization may make situations more, difficult in many ways, but this should definitely dismantle And I suppose maybe we can find or aim for something that is in between. I think the key is not to have just one way or one window of finances. So why not find combined ways? And you can apply for funds, even if you're a regional theater. You can apply for the local municipality and the central. And in all fields of culture and life, you can invent something that, you know, there's not only one window. You can go with your little, please give me some money for this thing. And I think the film industry is a good example, although it's extremely expensive, but normally there are various ways to get funds, and why not use that in other fields too?
Can this conference also become a platform for solidarity with artists from countries like Afghanistan, where art is banned, artists are imprisoned or killed?
Yes. But it's not easy dealing with totally different cultures for a lot of us. I mean, I know from Magdeburg we'd had 3,000 Syrian immigrants come and live there. Unfortunately, 60% of them were illiterate, which makes it very different for the kids. They came to see opera and ballet, and they all learned how to dance Hansel and Gretel. And then they came to Nutcracker, and the parents started shouting in the middle of the thing and dragging the children away, because the idea of seeing men in tights with jock straps lifting up girls in tutus was so abhorrent to them. They had not been well enough prepared, I have to say, that it was very difficult. So how do we give them the opportunity to show their culture and their artistic tradition? And can we get an audience for it? I mean, I don't know, maybe that's more ETC than it is.
Well, ETC, as the name implies, focuses on Europe. That said, we do have a number of theaters based in Ukraine, and absolutely, the organization serves basically as a lifeline for some of these theaters through exchange programs, through all different kinds of programs, by providing the support when it's most needed. So this kind of cross-border exchange support is absolutely, just absolutely essential, wherever possible. Yeah.
Again, it depends on what you mean by solidarity. If we say, you know, we express our solidarity, sure. Obviously, what happens over there is horrible. It's unacceptable. I don't think we in this room can do a lot about that. We can sign petitions, etc., etc. The very distinct kind of help or solidarity is if we create the act we are about to create, then that could be an example for other regions outside of Europe. It wouldn't help artists living in Afghanistan now, but I don't see how. I mean, apart from saying very, very loud that we feel very troubled by their troubles, and their troubles are our troubles. Beyond that, what can we do here?
To make one further point, I think calling attention to the situations is, if you're limited in your action, you can at least shed light on these issues.
No, absolutely.
But you know, hopefully it has more substance.
That's what I meant when I said say it very loud. Yeah.
But I must say that I understand the question, because truly, if we are an international conference, which Open Culture International Conference is international in scope, perhaps it wouldn't have to be so Western-centric. At the same time, we are working with very, very limited capacities. Just the organization of this event nearly killed us. So, but I understand where the question is coming from.
May I just add, I would like to just add at some point that I think also this is the question of solidarity of what's happening in Afghanistan. We can say that. I'm very concerned about the immigrants who come from these countries seeking safety and a future life. And us in our cultural organizations is, do we simply say, you have your culture, or do we try and get them to understand and integrate in our culture? And these are very complex questions, because we don't want to be colonial, we don't want to be domineering. And these, I think, but that's maybe for another conference, another time. But they're questions that I think occupy many of us.
Well, I'm really trying to be democratic, but I'm going to skip this question because I think that we have already kind of touched on the subject. So can I please ask to highlight the next one? Hannah Arendt, nobody has right to obey. Do individuals, actors of the civil sector, have an imperative to resist censorship? How can the collective protect these individuals?
I mean,
Oh, sorry, civil society, that is. Sorry, not cultural.
nobody has the right to obey. Why? So I don't understand how the question's formed. What do you mean, do we have the right to obey? We all obey things all the time. I can't drive at more than 80 kilometers or an hour or 50. We're always... I don't understand the question, really. Sorry.
I think the context here is censorship, that nobody has the right to obey, censors.
Oh, I see us. But as we've been saying, censorship is much more subtle. It's not quite so, a lot of it is self-censorship. I don't know, I mean... If I go to the barricades too often, the best thing to do is to resign, which I have to say I did when I was in Austria and the extreme right wing came into power. I left the country and survived.
A question for László. How do you explain that after the Free SSFE protest, the system survived for another 5 years? And what has changed in the last 2 years?
Well, I think I really believe that we lit some sparkles, we left our marks, but if it had only been for us, the system would still be around, and for the next 10 years we were too small for that. And also we refused any affiliation with political parties, which many people said was a wrong decision. But anyway, so there was no party politicians around us. I think it was very important, but it was certainly not enough to destroy that horrible system. Although I think many protests that came after that learned from us, and especially the civil society. So an example that you can actually stand up. It is not impossible. It's almost impossible, but not impossible to stand up against the government. But we, it's just like, good cheese and good wine. It needs some time to, get more mature. I think civil society had to wake up, and civil society woke up for many, many various reasons, partly because the Orbán government went so far that I think more people had enough. And the other thing that also changed was that suddenly someone appeared from the side of Orbán, from the very innerest circles of Orbán, who suddenly came on stage. But in fact, they learned a lot from our movement. Everything they did, mass demonstrations, were very theatrical, very spectacular, and I think they learned the lesson. And the last, and I'm not a political analyst, and I don't want to take the time. I think what was crucial is the whole building of the new opposition began with a case of pedophilia, and I think whatever the Orbán regime did before was horrible, unacceptable, etc., etc., etc. But pedophilia is something that blows everyone's mind, and I think that's how it began, and then it became like a landslide or what you call the avalanche. But that was the first thing, and that was very different from everything before that.
One final question. To give you a context, we are often discussing the thing that the cultural sector actually lives in a bubble of its own. And the question from the public is how to get the broader public, the citizens that are outside of our bubbles, on board in order to get engaged with protection of artistic freedom. What would be your suggestions for actually advocating in the general populace?
Descend the ivory tower. first. Descend the ivory tower, the thing, talk to people and involve them, not just not behave as if they were just audiences, paying or not paying for to attend your thing, but actually, involve them, include them, talk to them, ask them. That's, I think, very important. Then also use your artistic skills to discuss openly, social things. And by this, I don't mean that the so-called high arts that doesn't deal with the everyday issues is not relevant. It is relevant, but that's not the only art.
Yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely it's get out of the ivory tower. Not always easy for opera companies with a large orchestra and chorus, but the outreach and education programs that all of our members do are hugely important. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, a positive thing about Italy over the past 20 years, they've had a program, Opera Domani, Tomorrow's Opera, where they do participative opera with kids, and they reach 140,000 children in the north of Italy who learn a bit of the opera choruses, make props, join in theatres and sing along with. And I think that all of these things make it democratize our art form, introduce them to their own rich culture, and make them feel maybe I can be part of this in my life, and that's hugely important.
I agree. Another measure would be a broader awareness campaign for the public. Typically, that's the best way to reach the public. That's basically what Resistance Now Together strives to do. Basically, you mobilize these organizations and do this accessible, public-facing campaign. I think that's the best way to start, the best way to continue. That said, I want to name another example in terms of the creative work, similar to your example, Karen. To name one example, in Germany, there was a very high-level case of a news story where the far right had secret meetings and wanted to deport German citizens with foreign backgrounds. And so this became this blockbuster news story, and it was also staged, and the staged version was live streamed and reached over 1.5 million people. And this really helped mobilize the German public and led to actually the largest public outpouring in German history. Over 4 million people went out. So this is an excellent example of this kind of event where you can really find the spark that can sort of lead to this avalanche, as you said, to engage the public. So often you need just one thing. In this case, it was a secret meeting that got out to the public, and it led to this outpouring. And that also was a turning point, speaking of the German situation, and that it really led to a mindset shift. So many ordinary people were not as aware of the stakes. And after this, I can say there's absolutely a before and after. Now people are much more sensitive to these issues and the dangers.
And you were saying about the education, theater in education, education in theater, etc. One example which is far-fetched, but you will understand, the story of Teatro Diablo Mundo in Argentina was started by this man who made, he made theater, and at some point he wanted to learn how to juggle because he just loved that thing. And looking out of the window, he saw loads of street kids just hanging around doing nothing, and he decided to practice on the street without telling them anything. So he didn't go, I will educate you, I will lead you, I will give you something to do. No, he just went out to the street and did this, and the kids were, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, no, just practicing. Do you want to try? And this is how Teatro Diablo Mundo, that later counted hundreds, I mean literally hundreds of participants of the hugest street theater you can imagine. This is how it began. He was just, okay, I'm just doing my stuff. Do you want to join?
Yeah.
When you don't, educate people, just try and, involve them in direct ways.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think that we have raised multiple reasons for why we do need the European Artistic Freedom Act. May I please ask for a round of applause for Karen Stone, Amy PRADELL, and László UPOR. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.